that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Hey, by the way, just want to let you know, get you ready, we are going to change some things around the show. We will be changing from Talk America Radio to another broadcast partner. We'll let you know more about that as the details come available. We're going to change our broadcast time. I think we're going to be about an hour later. And a couple other changes, little format changes, nothing major. We're still going to try to bring you the best content that we possibly can. But I want to give you the heads up. The change is going to happen on the first broadcast in July. And from there, we'll be rolling. In the meantime, we got work to do right now. Mexico replaces Congress on immigration. What are you talking about? Well, after going over, around, through Congress to make any progress at all with regard to illegal immigration, Donald Trump finally determined that there's a better way to get things done.
There is now a statement from the White House. In fact, it's a statement from the president himself, a paper statement, that says he's going to impose new tariffs on all goods coming in from Mexico. He says they'll increase until the illegal immigration problem is resolved. And so, first of all, your thoughts on this? How is this going to affect this USMCA trade deal? And what are your thoughts about the use of tariffs here as this kind of retaliatory measure to try to force something to get done on immigration?
3 quick points. First and foremost, USMCA or NAFTA 2.0 is by no means a done deal. Democrats are divided on this in the House of Representatives as to whether or not it can be ratified. Vice President Mike Pence was in Ottawa earlier on Thursday meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and he all but guaranteed that USMCA would be ratified. But again, the politics in the House of Representatives are very divided. Secondly, the president's going to run into the business community here, in particular a key constituency of his manufacturers. They do not like tariffs, particularly tariffs impacting Mexico. I mean, that trade, like hundreds of millions of dollars worth daily crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, it really directly impacts manufacturers. And thirdly, this is really the most aggressive step that we've seen coming from this White House in tying tariffs with immigration. And as you mentioned, this definitely impacts the USMCA forecast, which is something that the president would like to get ratified heading into 2020, but as of now is incredibly uncertain future.
So with one announcement, Donald Trump got all of the media. He's ticked off the Congress, and he's got the business community up in arms. At least that's what CBS thinks. ABC reported on this the next day in this manner.
President Trump's dramatic escalation in the battle over the border, announcing new tariffs on Mexico overnight unless Mexico takes action to stop migrants from crossing to the U.S. This comes a day after the largest group of migrants ever was apprehended. It's already rattling financial markets. Our chief White House correspondent John Carl tracking all the latest. Good morning, John.
Good morning, George. The president is calling this his biggest and most dramatic move yet to control the border. The president made the announcement via Twitter, saying that in little over a week, the U.S. would be imposing a, quote, 5% tariff on all goods coming into our country from Mexico until illegal migrants coming through Mexico and into our country stop. Later, the White House explained the punishing tariff will go up as time drags on, increasing 5% on the first day of each month until hitting 25% in October. Overnight, the reaction was swift. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley calling it, quote, a misuse of presidential tariff authority and counter to congressional intent. The White House explained for the tariffs to be removed, Mexico would have to step up its enforcement on its southern border, crack down on criminal smuggling organizations, and change how it handles asylum seekers. Mexico is one of America's biggest trading partners. The effect of these tariffs would be felt almost immediately by U.S. consumers who would pay the brunt, most of the cost of these tariffs, as those costs are passed on to those buying Mexican goods here in the United States, George.
And, John, one of the broader consequences, just hours before this all happened, the president told Capitol Hill he wanted them to pass this new U.S.-Mexico free trade agreement. That was already an uphill fight. This is going to make it tougher.
This would seem to put that at risk. It would seem to violate, at the very least, the spirit of that agreement, which is all about reducing tariffs with the United States, Mexico, and Canada. But the Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, said last night that this is absolutely separate from any trade move because this is about controlling the border. But, of course, tariffs are all about trade, George.
Yeah, not clear that that's how members of Congress are going to see it. John Carl, thanks very much.
So the media has it all figured out. Donald Trump has stepped out there and he has alienated Mexico. He's alienated Canada. He's alienated, of course, all of the media. He's alienated the business community. He's alienated everybody. Everybody's ticked off. This is a terrible idea. How could Trump go off and do this? Now, of course, he's not going to have the support of the Democrats because if he had the support of the Democrats on immigration, none of this would even be going on. We would have built walls. We would have changed laws, we would have dealt with the DACA community, would have done all that, but they've staunchly resisted that from the moment that he was declared the winner of the general election. They're not going to give him a victory at all, knowing that he's going to beat them likely anyway in 2020, and if they give him a victory, it's just going to solidify the fact that they're not needed. We'll get more to that later. And of course when they found that the GOP was just up in arms about this, they really zeroed in on this. So by the 5th of June, CBS was really wanting to talk up the whole idea of Republican opposition.
In Washington, the president faces the strongest opposition from his own party since he took office. Many Republicans oppose his plan to put tariffs on all Mexican goods. They would start next week at 5% and go up from there unless Mexico does more to prevent illegal border crossings. Republicans indicate they could vote to tie the president's hands, but he dismisses that idea.
I don't think they will do that. I think if they do, it's foolish. There's nothing more important than borders.
Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill with more on this story. Good morning to you, Nancy. Why do you think the Republicans are rebelling against the president on this?
Well, because free trade, Gail, is a longtime core Republican principle, and they say you hike tariffs on Mexico by as much as 25%, which is what the president is threatening right now, and you simply end up charging American consumers more for Mexican goods. Senate Republicans gave White House officials an earful at a lunch meeting yesterday, urging them to reconsider or risk a resolution of disapproval. Here's Senate Leader Mitch McConnell.
There is not much support in my conference for tariffs, that's for sure.
Will you try to block those tariffs?
What I'm telling you is we're hoping that doesn't happen.
The United States imported about $350 billion worth of goods from Mexico last year alone. Tariffs could not only raise those prices, but they could threaten the nearly 5 million U.S. jobs that depend on trade with Mexico. Mexico's foreign minister is going to be sitting down today with the Secretary of State and the Vice President. He says he thinks this can all be worked out. But so far, Dana, we haven't seen much indication from the president that he's willing to bend on this.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you very much.
So Mitch McConnell is saying there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm for tariffs. Well, there's not supposed to be. But can we back up to something? Free trade is not what republicanism is all about. Free trade is not what conservatism is all about. Fair trade. Fair trade. One of the reasons why the Chinese have rolled back as many tariffs as they have, that's not being reported, but they have rolled back tariffs not only on goods going into our country, but into other business partners, trading partners they have as well, because it's been recognized and they've been called on it that what you do is unfair. And that's what's going on. It's a negotiation. It never has been a war. But the media, who controls a lot of the conversation, but they do it so poorly that they're being ignored, they went out not satisfied to say, look, we got to press it everywhere. And notice how they've been saying all this time, oh, the consumers are going to be really upset. I haven't seen or read or heard one report that indicates that there are people out there in the streets screaming and hollering about tariffs on Mexico. I haven't heard that yet. Now, back up a little bit, a couple of days before that, on the 3rd, CNBC has been really on top of this. They went out there and found out that Chipotle was getting ready to be really beat to death by these Mexico tariffs.
Morning, Chipotle speaking out on the proposed tariffs on Mexican imports, saying if enacted, they could negatively impact the company's cost by about $15 million in 2019 and reduce margins by 20 to 30 basis points. This is based on the starting tariff rate of 5% in June and includes the accelerated rate of 25% later in the year. In a statement, CFO Jack Hartung said if the tariffs become permanent, we would look to offset these costs through other margin improvement efforts already underway. We could also consider passing on these costs through a modest price increase, such as about a nickel on a burrito, which would cover the increased cost without impacting our strong value proposition. The company also added it is aware that it could easily solve the volatility in the supply chain by purchasing pre-mashed or processed avocados, which would be cheaper, of course, and readily available, but the company's committed to its brand purpose and upholding its food with integrity promise here. Now, late Friday, the company said it has been working to diversify its produce supply consistent with those principles. It does not break out what percentage of produce is imported from Mexico, but analysts say that any brand, of course, with avocado on the menu will be impacted by this tariff. Chipotle does say that beyond just avocados, it also buys limes, jalapenos, tomatoes, and bell peppers from Mexico. So they're not saying that they definitely will increase prices, but if this happens, they could consider, offsetting some of those costs with a modest price increase.
I can't think of a major chain restaurant that doesn't have avocado on the menu in some way. Mm-hmm. Also, booze. Constellation Brands stock down 11% in a week, the maker of Corona and tequilas as well. What other restaurants could possibly be hurt by these?
So analysts obviously called out Chipotle because guacamole and avocado is such a big part of their menu. Customers really tend to gravitate towards that. Also, Panera, no longer public, but they do serve quite a bit of avocado in the fast casual quick service space. Chuy's Holdings and then Fiesta Mexican Grill, they basically are two other groups that could be impacted. Also, smaller chains. They have much fewer restaurants. So, the supply chain diversification could be a little more challenging.
And you think about.
Here's what I get out of this. At the end of the day, if these tariffs go into effect, and if the other things that Chipotle was already doing to improve their margins means, in other words, make more money off of where their prices already are, if that doesn't deal with this, they might raise prices by a nickel on a burrito. I'm not trying to minimize that. But a nickel. 25% tariffs would mean a nickel on your burrito. Okay. Notice how they tried to make it sound, this could impact them by 20 to 30 basis points. Do you know what a basis point is? A basis point is 1/100th of 1%. So 20 to 30 basis points is 0.2 to 0.3%. That's how much this is going to impact them. The idea that this is going to tear up business is ridiculous. And everything about price increases saying, we may need to do this, provide the other things that they're already doing to cut costs, don't work. But, of course, the business community is solidly against what Donald Trump is doing, right? So we have, again, let me just recap. We have the press, we have Congress, both parties in D.C. are just outraged by this. We have the business community, all these people, and of course the business community was having people speak for them. They weren't necessarily speaking out about this. Okay. Do you know who really wasn't up in arms and jumping up or down and saying this is terrible? How could we possibly consider such a thing? How about this guy?
All conflicts in bilateral relations must be faced and resolved through dialogue, through communication. The use of coercive measures does not lead to anything good.
No.
And we have to help so they do not enter the United States illegally, but we also have to do it respecting human rights.
That gentleman who was there speaking Spanish is Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the president of Mexico. Notice what he said. We have to help to make sure that they're not crossing into the United States illegally. We have to do it with while respecting human rights. In short, he's agreeing with Donald Trump and saying that Mexico needs to step up and stop this. Well, we don't want coercive measures, but we do have to do something. We need to help. Oh, okay. That was on the 1st of June. The day after ABC followed the CBS report talking about how this was a terrible disaster, Mexico didn't see it that way. Matter of fact, on the 7th of June, fast forward a little bit, France 24 English filed this report regarding Mexico's response to what Donald Trump was putting before them.
Mexico's border with Guatemala. Migrants hoping for better living conditions are still streaming through here. Their plan, crossing Mexico all the way to the U.S., but the situation here could soon become more difficult for migrants. Mexico is tightening border control to stem the flow of people marching to the U.S. because if Mexico doesn't take drastic measures, Washington says it will go ahead with plans to increase tariffs on Mexican goods. It's all being discussed in Washington.
We don't have yet an agreement, but we are advancing in order to reach an agreement as we want.
So far, Mexico has promised to deploy 6,000 National Guard troops on its southern border. It has already detained people marching in a caravan. It has also started freezing alleged migrant smugglers' bank accounts. But for the U.S., that's not enough.
I'm encouraged that they came today with more, but it'll be a matter for the president to consider what they're offering, enough for us to evaluate those proposals to determine whether or not it will be sufficient to really bring this crisis of illegal immigration at our southern border to an end.
Because figures are soaring. According to U.S. authorities, 144,000 people have arrived at the border in May alone, the highest number in 13 years. Donald Trump wants Mexico to review its asylum laws, so migrants would only be able to ask for asylum there and not in the U.S. That's one of the measures being discussed.
So while the media expressed outrage, while Republicans and Democrats in D.C. were wringing their hands about what this could possibly mean, while the business community was being asked to explain how they would deal with what hadn't happened yet, Mexico heard this and got to work negotiating. Now, CNBC, bless their hearts, did not believe that this was going to lead to anything. They actually thought that there was not going that the tariffs are going to be imposed. This was their report from the 6th of June. Excuse me.
Good morning, Becky. Day 2 of talks on border security and migration controls are happening today. Small breakout negotiations are scheduled between U.S. and Mexican counterparts, and they're taking place at the State Department. A senior administration official tells me talks have been positive and that President Trump wants to wrap up the situation soon, but that probably won't happen before Monday. The likeliest outcome, according to this official, is a deal sometime before July 1st when those tariffs hit 10%. President Trump briefed last night, offered these thoughts from Europe this morning.
As you know, Mexico was in yesterday. They're coming back this morning in Washington. They'll be meeting at the White House. I think a lot of progress was made yesterday, but we have to make a lot of progress. They have to step up, and they have to step up to the plate. And perhaps they will. We're going to see. They can solve the problem.
That sentiment echoed by the vice president this morning, but so far Mexico's proposals have fallen short. Mexico's offers to reprogram other joint funds to the border and help strengthen Central America's economies were well received. But I'm told that the White House still wants Mexico to agree to keep migrants on its side of the border until immigration cases are processed and to become what's called a safe third country, meaning Mexico must accept asylum seekers before they get to the U.S. Mexico has said that specifically is a red line, Andrew, but we'll see what sort of compromise, if any, can be reached.
So it's not going to happen. They're not going to be able to stave it off. We're going to have tariffs go into effect. The next day, the same day of the France 24 English report, you had this.
President Trump says that a deal has been reached now with Mexico. The tariffs scheduled to be implemented by the U.S. on Monday against Mexico are now hereby suspended. In a tweet, he is calling them indefinitely suspended. He is taking strong steps with the issues related to immigration at the southern border. Mr. Trump says details of the agreement are still forthcoming. But again, we've been waiting for this information to hit. We had some indications that it would happen. But again, President Trump tweeting out that I am pleased to inform you that the United States of America has reached a signed agreement with Mexico. Again, as far as the measures that were agreed upon, it's going to be migration through Mexico to the southern border. It's being done to greatly reduce or eliminate illegal migration coming from Mexico into the United States. President Trump says that the details of the agreement will be released shortly by the State Department.
So from the 30th of May to the 7th of June, Donald Trump got more out of the Mexican government in concrete measures that would deal with immigration than he has in more than 2 years working with Democrats and Republicans in Congress. And he did this while he was not even in the country. He was in Europe on a state visit to the UK. Are you kind of figuring out what this is about yet? Donald Trump wasn't talking to the media when he made the announcement. It wasn't for their benefit. He wasn't talking to Democrats and Republicans. He wasn't talking to the business community. All of these people, bless their hearts, seem to be fine with the status quo. Why they would be fine with that, I have no idea. But they seem to be fine with the status quo. He decided to take measures into his own hands to fulfill his campaign promise, and there you have it. If it takes a week working directly with Mexico on immigration to put in place concrete changes that would reduce record illegal immigration into this country, please explain to me why I need Congress, the U.S. Congress. I'm sure they're good for other issues, but they're definitely worthless on illegal immigration. And if I can get the Mexican government to close down the pathway from Central America to the United States, I don't need a wall. I don't need anything. I have countries respecting their own sovereign borders, which makes it easier for me to respect my own. So I am all for replacing Congress with the government of Mexico when it comes to illegal immigration. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. We're getting ready to change that pretty soon. Please stay tuned. We'll let you know more as we know more. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let me just state this. If Joe Biden is your candidate on the Democrat side, then impeachment is your only hope. at the presidency. And impeachment doesn't do anything but put the vice president, who is also not someone that the Democrats care for, in office. But what am I talking about with that? Joe Biden. Rudy Giuliani once said Joe Biden hasn't been right about anything in 30 plus years. And to be honest with you, that's a true statement. He was on the Foreign Relations Committee. He was everywhere, and he was wrong everywhere he went. He was never correct about anything. And I always wondered why. But then Washington Post, doing some interesting work of late, published a report about Joe Biden's 1988 presidential campaign, his failed bid for the Democrat Party nomination. And they put together 3 clips that show pretty much who Joe Biden is.
But this standard is not a measure of how we can evaluate the condition of our society. It cannot measure the health of our children, the quality of our education, the joy of their play.
If the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, for the joy of their play.
Let us pledge that our generation of Americans will pay any price, bear any burden, accept any challenge, and meet any hardship to secure the blessings of prosperity and the promise of opportunity for our children.
We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
And I started thinking as I was coming over here, why is it that Joe Biden is the first in his family ever to go to a university?
Why am I the first Kinnick in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university?
Why is it that my wife, who's sitting out there in the audience, is the first in her family to ever go to college?
Why is Glenys the first woman in her family in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university?
No, it's not because they weren't as smart. It's not because they didn't work as hard. It's because they didn't have a platform upon which to stand.
Does anybody really think that they didn't get what we had because they didn't have the talent or the strength or the endurance or the commitment? Of course not. It was because there was no platform upon which they could stand.
To put that in context for you, that was Joe Biden in 1988 repeating Robert F. Kennedy's words. Robert F. Kennedy died in 1968. That was followed by Joe Biden in 1988 repeating parts of the John F. Kennedy inaugural speech from 1961. Wow. He actually had a snowball's chance of getting away with that third one, talking about how he was the first in his family and his wife was the first in her family to make it to college, except that was verbatim what had been said by a Neil Kinnock, who was a former leader of the British Labour Party some years before. Joe Biden doesn't have an idea of his own. And anything that Joe Biden says that sounds inspirational was said by somebody else first, and he knows it. John King of CNN of all places. So this is interesting. You have the Washington Post, no friend of those right of center, calling out Joe Biden today, in this day and age, for his plagiarism, verbal plagiarism, that he committed back in 1968. John King looked at his most recent plagiarism, which was the information on his campaign website dealing with climate change, and he was truly not happy with the former vice president.
Joe Biden's campaign fending off allegations of plagiarism today after revelations that the former vice president's brand new climate change policy plan copied language directly from multiple liberal activist groups and a news site. The instances circulated on social media yesterday just hours after the plan was posted by the campaign online. The Biden campaign claiming simply a matter of some missing citations. But it was a similar allegation that helped sink Biden's 1988 presidential campaign. CNN's Arlette Saenz joins us live from Manchester, New Hampshire. Arlette, forgive me here, having lived through the 87-88 campaign. This is a pretty amateur mistake for the frontrunners campaign to make on a substantial policy rollout when they had to know, when Team Biden got together planning to announce his campaign, the one thing they cannot do is plagiarize.
Well, John, this was certainly a glitch in their rollout. Biden had been talking about this climate change plan that was going to be coming for weeks now, and he was pushing back against criticism that he might take a middle ground approach to climate change. And in that plan that was released yesterday, Biden embraced parts of the Green New Deal, which has become a litmus test for many of these 2020 Democratic candidates. He called the Green New Deal a crucial framework for combating climate change and said that he aimed to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But then they did run into a little bit of trouble when it came to the actual plan that was released itself, when it was revealed that some passages in that plan bore similar language to proposals that had been put forth by progressive organizations, either on their websites or in letters. And the Biden campaign said that as soon as they realized that some of these citations were missing, that they worked to quickly amend that in their plan. But of course, to put a little context on this, as you mentioned, Biden's first presidential campaign back in the 1988 race was derailed by charges of plagiarism, both on the campaign trail and also during his time in law school. So this is certainly something that they are going to have to be mindful of going forward, especially as you look back at the former vice president's own personal history with this, John.
Supposed to be a campaign A team. This was not an A performance. Arlette Saenz live for us in New Hampshire. Appreciate it. And just to Arlette's point, as we come back to the room, I just want to read you. This is Joe Biden in a New York Times story. We can show you the front page of the New York Times first on this day, September 18th, 1987. Mr. Biden said today, as he did 22 years ago, that he had misunderstood the rules of citation and footnoting. This is about him plagiarizing while in college. I was wrong, but I was not malevolent in any way. I did not intentionally move to mislead anybody, and I didn't. To this day, I didn't. To this day issue, that's exactly what they're saying now. I'm sorry. When this is your issue, when this has been an issue in the past, how? This is a staff issue. I'm sure the former vice president had probably nothing to do with this, but he's the leader of the organization. Hello.
Yeah, also these days, as opposed to the 80s or 22 years before that, they have software to do this. It's quite simple to just check everything, just to be on the safe side and make sure, if you don't trust your own eyeballs, that you're not going to make this sort of a public error because somebody's going to catch it. It shows a bit of a lack of forethought, I suppose, is the polite way of saying it. Or, I guess the worst case scenario is potentially a little bit of too much arrogance that you can just do this and not have anybody looking at you.
It's lazy or it's arrogant. And let me flip the thing. You would think he would be happy to quote progressive groups on his website as they're attacking him. He should a great embrace.
It could have been a lot worse. What if he'd taken from a center-right think tank instead of from progressive groups?
Well, let's move on. This is, I'll call this a style issue, although this is a leadership issue. This is a competence issue. He wants to be president of the United States. This is a leadership and competence issue. You can't do this stuff. You just can't. You do it in our business, you get fired.
Well, yeah, sometimes if you get caught, but you didn't do anything to get rid of Joe Biden when he plagiarized stuff in law school. They gave him a degree, apparently. You didn't do anything in 1988 when he plagiarized words and things on the campaign trail. It sunk his campaign. No, Joe Biden's an idiot. That's what sunk his campaign. Because an idiot would at least look at somebody else's words and refashion them to make them his own. But when you're an idiot, you just read somebody else's words and try to pass them off as your own. Joe Biden's an idiot. But the other thing that comes up with Joe Biden, we get more and more. We're seeing more and more about the character or lack thereof regarding Joe Biden. And this next one deals with, the issue of abortion and his faith. Joe Biden claims to be a Roman Catholic. Claims to be. Roman Catholicism abhors abortion. They do not believe that a child should be killed in the womb, particularly for the convenience of the woman who is pregnant. They don't believe that. And I understand, before you go into what about rape, what about incest? Yeah, look, Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood, has already established it. 98.5% of all abortions in the United States are done for expediency. Less than 1.5% of all abortions in the U.S. are done because of rape, because of incest, or because there are health issues involving the mother. So basically, 3 out of 200 children are killed because the female was raped, she was a victim of incest, or her health was at risk. Miss me with that weak argument. It's an exception argument, and you want to kill 197 children out of 200 just to make sure those 3 don't get through. Wow. And none of these kids have done anything worthy of death. Again, wow. So Joe Biden is a Catholic in name only. He's a CNO. He's a Catholic in name only. He throws it out there when he wants someone to feel sympathetic or he wants to try to identify with someone who's religious. Joe Biden once supported the Hyde Amendment, which forbids or prohibits the federal government from funding abortion in the United States. But now, because he wants to be the nominee for president from the Democrat Party, and the Democrat Party is abortion first, abortion. Let me say this. The Democrat Party is to abortion what George Wallace was to segregation. They want abortion today, abortion tomorrow, abortion forever. So as a result, Joe Biden, if he wants that nomination, he has to change his position regarding the Hyde Amendment. No problem, says Joe.
Folks, before I begin my remarks, I want to address something that right up front. And I know, you all know, that the fact of the matter is that women's rights and women's health are under assault like we haven't seen in the last 50 years. And we've seen state after state, including Georgia, passing extreme laws in clear violation of constitutional rights protected, including Roe v. Wade. And some have gone so far in states to deny even any exceptions for circumstances that would involve the right of a woman to choose. And it's clear that these folks are going to stop at nothing to get rid of Roe. And it's clear to me that we have to just be just as strong in defending it. I support Roe. I support a woman's right to choose under that constitutional guaranteed provision. And quite frankly, I always will. Folks, you know, and I'm going to fight to protect a woman's right to make her own personal decisions when it gets to her health care. I've also, for many years, and let me say this before you start to clap or boo, is that for many years as U.S. Senator, I've supported the Hyde Amendment like many, many others have. Because there was sufficient monies and circumstances where women were able to exercise that right, women of color, poor women, women who are not able to have access, and it was not under attack as it was then, as it is now. But circumstances have changed. I've been working through the final details of my health care plan, like others in this race, and I've been struggling with the problems that Hyde now presents. It's become clear to me that to get universal coverage and to provide for the full range of health services women need, which I plan to do with the continued expansion of Medicaid and the public option of a Medicare plan, in that environment where providers like Planned Parenthood are under unrelenting attack, where we have a circumstance, and I want to be clear why I'm taking the position I have. So I make no apologies for my last position, and I make no apologies for what I'm about to say. The fact of the matter is that when, in fact, there is this enormous pressure and even threat to close down clinics that are available in the past for women who do not have the funds but are able to have them paid for privately, as we've been able to do, that was one thing. But we now see so many Republican governors denying health care to millions of the most poorest and most vulnerable Americans by refusing even Medicaid expansion. I can't justify leaving millions of women without access to the care they need and the ability to exercise their constitutionally protected right. If I believe health care is a right, as I do, I can no longer support an amendment that makes that right dependent on someone's zip code. But I want to be clear with you. I don't want to mislead you. If in fact it was still available, I think, just as I've never attempted to impose my views on anyone else as to when life begins, I have never attempted to impose my view on who should pay for it if people fundamentally disagree with the position we take. But folks, times have changed. I don't think these guys are going to let up.
That was an elegant word salad that makes no sense. Let's make sure we're clear about something, and I've covered this before. Abortion is unpopular in America, and it always has been. The height of popularity for abortion in America was the Roe v. Wade decision. Since then, the American people have rejected it. Oh, how can you say that? Because of the number of legal abortion clinics open in the United States. The decline from the 1970s has been precipitous, to the point where, for example, in the state of Missouri, there is only one. There are other states where you are looking at less than 5. In the state, if abortion were popular among the people in those states, do you really think they would stand idly by while this extremely important right of women was taken away? They would not. Abortion is popular with the radical left, who do not have an appreciation for traditional family or the life that it harbors. That's what that is. And now, Joe Biden, because he has people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and he has the Muslim woman from Minnesota who's an anti-Semite, and he also has the other woman from, I think she's from Detroit, I believe, who said we're going to impeach that MF Trump. This is what you have. You can't be someone who actually thinks that children deserve a shot at life and be a member of that party. They have a representative, some woman from Washington, who made it clear, if you're not down with abortion, we don't even know that you're a Democrat. They've taken over the party. Joe Biden could never win anything as something other than a Democrat. So what choice does he have? But it shows he has no scruples, he has no principles, he has no morals, he has no spine. And the idea that he has faith is just ludicrous. It's got none of that either. Well, what about this whole thing with Anita Hill? Because now, of course, if you're going to be a Democrat, you got to be on the right side of Me Too. Well, is he?
She did not get a fair hearing. She did not get treated well. That's my responsibility. And I committed that I am determined to continue the fight to see to it that we basically change the culture in this country where a woman is put in a position where she is disbelieved. As the committee chairman, I take responsibility that she did not get treated well. I take responsibility for that.
Can you tell the committee what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged?
Yeah. Anita Hill was victimized. There is no question in my mind. Look, at its root, this is all about the abuse of power. It's all about the abuse of power. Whether it's Harvey Weinstein or the guy who, the plumber who has a secretary he harasses. It's all about the abuse of power, number one. Number two, women should be believed. I believed Anita Hill. There are a bunch of white guys. No, I mean this sincerely. A bunch of white guys hearing this testimony in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So when Anita Hill came to testify, she faced a committee that didn't fully understand what the hell it was all about. To this day, I regret I couldn't come up with a way to get her the kind of hearing she deserved.
I think what she wants you to say is, I'm sorry for the way I treated you, not for the way you were treated. I think that would be closer.
Well, but I'm sorry the way she got treated. In terms of, I never heard say, if you go back and look what I said and didn't say, I don't think I treated her badly. There are a lot of mistakes made across the board. And for those, I apologize. That we may have been able to do and conduct it better. But I believed Dr. Hill from the beginning. Mm-hmm. From the beginning. Yes. And I said it. Yeah. I said it.
You were wrong from the beginning. And you said how wrong you were. From the beginning. You said it. Can I remind people of something? He said on more than one occasion, I'm sorry I couldn't get her the hearing she deserved. It wasn't her hearing. It was a Supreme Court nomination hearing for now Associate Justice Clarence Thomas. It wasn't her hearing for her to be evaluated as though she were a victim. She was making an allegation that was unsubstantiated. So Joe Biden, plagiarist in chief, wow, Catholic in name only, believes this woman who comes and accuses a black man. Oh yeah, got a bunch of white guys. So let me get this straight. Are you trying to say that white folks don't understand sexual harassment, or they don't understand when someone is lying about sexual harassment? White guys can't understand that. Only black people can understand. Really? Wow. This is a problem. And this is the front runner. We didn't even get into discussing how he is still out there defending the 1994 crime bill. Not a problem for me, but if you're a Democrat, you can't defend that, because that's part of the whole mass incarceration. Needless to say, look, here's the dirty little secret about the 1994 crime bill. Mass incarceration was the result because mass crime was being committed. Mass incarceration was the result from the difference between changing the sentencing for the difference between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, because that's what black people wanted. Black people wanted harsher penalties for crack cocaine because nobody was selling powder in the hood. It was crack that was ravaging the black community, and the black people, Jesse Jackson and company, wanted those punishments. They got them. They got them. And Joe Biden helped write the law. And now he's trying to say it didn't contribute to mass incarceration. Well, yes, it did. Now, if you're a Democrat, you think that's a bad thing. If you're someone who cares about black people, no, you don't. Because you actually made an effort to take black people in the black community who were doing irreparable, terrible amounts of harm to other black people, and you got them out of there. Was it enough? No. But the alternative was what? Do nothing? The alternative was not to recognize one of the few accurate statements that Hillary Clinton made. There are super predators walking around in black neighborhoods taking advantage of black people, and the white folks don't want to get involved. Why should they? As though the black people who live there are doing enough. No, they're scared, and they want the white man to come in and clean it up. Now, of course, Bill Clinton, who is nothing if not very good at reading the political tea leaves, has come out and said, oh, yeah, we got it wrong. And Joe Biden still can't quite catch up because Joe Biden doesn't have an original thought. And if he doesn't know the words, he better go find them or get somebody to find them for him so that he can speak them. And this is the guy that you think is going to beat Donald Trump. Let's be clear about this. You're trying to tell people that their choice, which brought them jobs, which brought them prosperity, which brought them more money in their pocket from rising incomes and lower taxation, that he's wrong for America. Oh, by the way, we haven't been at war either. We were at war for almost all of the prior president's 2 terms. We're not at war. But you want to tell me that this guy, plagiarism, can't keep his hands off women that aren't connected to him, Hyde Amendment, just kill every kid you can, Anita Hill's hearing when it wasn't her hearing, the 1994 crime bill didn't put more people in jail. Wow. This is This is your guy. I tend to agree with Mr. Varney on this.
Before he's even launched his campaign, Joe Biden's presidential bid appears to be on life support. A second woman has come forward to accuse him of inappropriate and unwelcome behavior. Swift reaction. Look at this op-ed in the New York Times, quote, "The wrong time for Joe Biden." When the Times questions his campaign before it's begun, you know Joe has a problem. But surely this is a much bigger problem for the party and its hopes of winning the White House. Where's the centrist? Where's the moderate? All the 2020 frontrunners have embraced radical ideas. Biden's busy apologizing. He's not even in the debate. Is he a socialist? Would he ban private health insurance? Where does he stand on the Green New Deal? Don't know any of the above. He's scrambling to stay in a game which he hasn't even yet joined. Meanwhile, Democrat candidates move further and further beyond radical economic ideas. Constitutional change is on their agenda. It's not just the economy, it's the American political system they're aiming at. Kill the Electoral College, expand the Supreme Court, pack it with liberals or term limits for justices, anything to get around a conservative-leaning majority. Where's the voice of moderation if Joe Biden doesn't have a voice? Is there any other moderate out there who could still run? Hillary Clinton? Very doubtful. Not entirely sure she's a moderate either. I can't think of anyone else except the billionaires. Michael Bloomberg chose not to run, but that was before Joe Biden ran into trouble. Howard Schultz, Starbucks founder. He's not a Democrat, but Biden's problems may give him a boost. Frankly, I don't think the Democrats are looking for an alternative. They're perfectly happy with a sharp left turn. Biden's problem is to their advantage. And it's surely to President Trump's advantage, too.
Stu Varney figured all that out before Biden even announced, and he has shown that he was dead on. Joe Biden came into the race in the lead and found himself unable to enjoy that and has chased every further and further left position out there. Why? Because he's an idiot without character, without spirit, without a mind of his own. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that, we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
The presidential campaign season is just revving up, but it may be the easiest for voters to figure out. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, both President Trump and his Democrat Party opponent will have their own unique agendas. President Trump's agenda will include growing the U.S. economy. His Democrat opponent's agenda? Stop Trump. The Trump agenda will, of course, include securing the borders. The agenda of Trump's Democrat opponent will be to stop Trump. Low unemployment is also part of the president's agenda. His Democrat opponent will zero in on his or her agenda to stop Trump. Trump's agenda also includes bringing back America's industrial prowess. His Democrat opponent's agenda? Stop Trump. Trump's agenda includes fair trade deals and lower taxes. The Democrat agenda? Stop Trump. Affordable medical care. A further reduction of regulations and improving infrastructure round out the president's agenda, while his one-track pony Democrat opponent's agenda is stop Trump, which also means to stop America. I'm Ron Edwards. Let's meet Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on AmericaMatters.us and 12 a.m. Sundays on Talk America Radio Network.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1, FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. And I've been saying so far, just repeating it, we are going to be making some changes. We're going to be moving to a new platform, a new internet service. So both our show and our podcast will be carried differently. However, you're still going to get me, and it's just going to be, I think we're changing our time to be maybe 1 hour later. Of course, the podcast, you can pick that up and listen to it anytime you please. But these are good changes. The show is not changing as far as length or content. Just going to be a little formatting, and we're just going to be working with some different people. And I think you're going to like it. Let's get to work on Hour 2 now. The Democrat abortion consumption. And I do mean they are consumed now with very few things. The impeachment of the president, inactivity to the detriment of the American people and the American electorate on immigration, and abortion. There's also homosexuality, and trying to say that 3% of the population that is abnormal in their choice of sexual proclivities deserves more rights than those who aren't abnormal. Okay. Those are their issues. Here, before I say anything else, those issues, homosexuality and them being great people that we should all bow down to and show uber respect, impeaching the president, abortion, and doing nothing on immigration. How does that define any American individual? That's not Americanism. That's not even American at all. That's anti-American. Almost point blank anti-American in every way. Are you trying to say if you're pro-homosexual? You know what? Let me help you out with pro-homosexual. If you're pro-homosexual, you're anti any country that exists. Homosexuality does benefit to no country on the planet. None. If there were no homosexuality, if homosexuality were a capital crime everywhere in the world would not be worse off. And I'm not advocating that anyone do that. I don't think you should go out and kill people just because they're wrong. But the idea that they should somehow be protected and elevated to the detriment of those who are not wrong makes even less sense. No country benefits from homosexuality. So yes, if you're pro-homosexual and you're Chinese, you're anti-China. If you're pro-homosexual in Indonesia, you're anti-Indonesian. If you're Italian and pro-homosexual, you're anti-Italian. And if you're American and favoring homosexuality, you're anti-American. Don't get me wrong, homosexuals exist in all those countries. But to promote that as an ideology is anti. It's that simple. But I don't want to get too far afield from where I was going. I mean, let's get back to abortion. because on that issue, it's like watching an old episode of the Fantastic Four. When you say abortion to a Democrat, it's flame on, and the Human Torch has appeared because they go ballistic over abortion. And the interesting thing to me is, well, is this something that they've come upon recently, or is this the way it's always been? Has it ebbed and flowed? And here's the reason I asked that. Because Washington Post is actually reviving my respect for them with some of the things that they are reporting with respect to the Democrat Party. And they're not spinning it, they're just putting their words out there. This is what Nancy Pelosi had to say in May of 2017. And she gave the indication that abortion was no longer as strong an issue for the Democrat Party.
It's you know what? It's kind of fading as an issue. And it really is. I mean, it's not fading in the hearts and minds of the people who are that way. That's why, you know what? That's why Donald Trump is president of the United States. The evangelicals and the Catholics. Anti-marriage equality, anti-choice. That's how he got to be president. Overlooked everything about environment, feed the hungry, minister to the needs of the sick and the poor, and all the things they all stand for. And they're beautiful. Evangelicals, we work with them so many immigration issues, preserving our God's planet, which I believe it is too. We have good stewards. But everything was trumped, literally and figuratively, by that. But you know what? The vitality of the party is what is exciting. Can somebody get the nomination? I don't think so. You know what I mean? It depends on where you're talking about.
Could you clarify that statement? You said abortion is fading as an issue. Do you mean for the Democratic
Within the
Party?
Democrats, for the Democrats. Within the, I don't think that you'll see too many candidates going out there and saying, I'm running as a pro-life candidate. If that happens to be, you know, and it's usually not pro-life or not, it's how far are you willing to go on the issue. But let's not spend too much time. Look, I have 5 children, 6 years to the day. Alexandra came home. Nancy turned 6 that week. So I say, anybody wants to talk about this subject, you tell me after you have 5 children in 6 years, and you come to my office, and we'll discuss how I should decide what other people should do in their lives. Because that's just not, you know, it's not a question of the substance of the issue. It's a question of what right does any of us have to voice that onto somebody else.
That was Nancy Pelosi saying that abortion is fading as an issue. This was May of 2017. This was before the midterm, a year and a half before the midterms. And it was in her mind, and people always want to say how smart she is and how attuned she is, it was fading as an issue. What happened then? She said that she doesn't think that anyone's going to be running for president, for the nomination, apparently, of her party, making abortion a primary issue. Oh, really? Tell that to the Democrats, particularly the females who are running, as a year later, in May of 2018, NBC filed this report on what Democrat candidates for president were saying about abortion.
Tonight, could the culture wars now make a comeback as a top issue in 2020? Alabama's new law making virtually every abortion a crime, even in cases of rape and incest, sparked an intense debate there.
Why are you putting yourself in God's shoes?
It's not our place as humans to extinguish that life.
Now, the measure is becoming a rallying cry nationally for 2020 Democrats, alarmed by a growing number of state laws restricting abortion.
It's nothing short of an attack on women's basic human rights and civil rights.
Women's health care is under attack, and we will not stand for it.
Alabama lawmakers have acknowledged their goal is to get the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's something candidate Trump predicted.
That'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court.
The president's anti-abortion agenda has energized his conservative supporters. But there are critics of the Alabama law. One top Republican, Kevin McCarthy, telling NBC's Casey Hunt it's too restrictive.
Do you think that law goes too far?
It goes further than I believe, yes.
While the Alabama measure is a political flashpoint, legal experts say it's almost certain the law would be struck down by lower courts, and the Supreme Court could choose not to weigh in.
The Democrat candidates you heard in there were Kirsten Gillibrand, who's, I don't know why she's even still in the race, and Willie Brown's garden tool, Kamala Harris, who's not going to win the nomination. But they're jumping out, and they're not the only ones jumping out and talking about how big a deal this is, and how this is, people restricting abortion rights. And the thing I always remember about the whole discussion about abortion is not about women. When someone is being inconvenienced versus someone dying, it's never about the person who's being inconvenienced. It's about the person dying. Because if you want to do it this way, the way you're doing it, then why are we having discussions about police who make lawful shootings just because you don't like what they're doing at the time? What's the difference? Well, this woman she didn't think it was in her best interest to keep this baby. He didn't think it was in his best interest to continue to deal with this subject. And the subject that the police officer dealt with was much more likely to be doing harm to somebody than the child in the womb. Well, what about a woman's health? We've already dealt with that. 98.5% of abortions in the United States are not done as a result of a woman being raped, being involved in incest, or the pregnancy has put her health at risk. 98.5% of abortions in the U.S. have nothing to do with those three. And you really have to go a little bit to understand just how bonkers this really is. Democrats hate children. That's all there is to it. You cannot tell me that you are pro-abortion, but you care about children. How can you care about children when you would kill them? And even those who, let's say that a woman has an abortion and the abortion attempt is not successful and the child is delivered alive. If you care about children at all and you have a child now, of course you would want to, your heart would go out to that child. You would want to do the best for it and give it every opportunity to remain alive and healthy, right? Well, I'm sorry, back in February of this year, 44 out of 47 Democrats didn't exactly agree with that.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. All the Democratic senators running for president voted against the Born Alive Act. The bill focuses on what happens to a baby after a botched abortion. It says doctors and nurses should provide the same care to those babies as they give to others born prematurely. This bill would punish doctors if they don't provide that treatment.
It would significantly interfere with the doctor-patient relationship.
44 Democrats voted against the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act.
The bill is solely meant to intimidate doctors and restrict patients' access to care and has nothing to do with protecting children.
Minnesota Democrat Tina Smith worked as a Planned Parenthood exec.
They didn't need politicians looking over their shoulder in the doctor's office telling them what to do.
It is and has always been a crime to harm or kill newborn babies.
But the Born Alive Act would require doctors provide the same resuscitation they'd give to a baby born at that premature age and rush the child to the hospital.
We're talking about the life of a child that is born. So while my colleagues across the aisle are saying this is about abortion, this is about a mother's health care, that's absolutely incorrect.
3 Democrats joined Republicans in voting for the bill. Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, Doug Jones of Alabama, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia.
I know it's political marksmanship, if you will, to put it back up and put him on the board again going into a difficult 2020 election.
The bill's sponsor, Ben Sass, defends the vote.
Picture a baby that's already been born, that is outside the womb, gasping for air. That's the only thing that today's vote is actually about. We're talking about babies who've already been born.
Pro-life groups will target senators who voted against this bill. The Susan B. Anthony list's Jill Stanek was here on the Hill meeting lawmakers before the vote. She tells me it was important to get every senator on the record. President Trump tweeted, "This will be remembered as one of the most shocking votes in the history of Congress." Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason.
I would consider that somewhat shocking. 44 out of 47 Democrat senators voted against legislation that would compel medical doctors to provide life-affirming and life-saving, perhaps, care to a baby. Period. Now, this is the interesting thing. I mean, and I can see this. Once the child is born, the discussion about abortion is over. Because if the child is born, isn't the pregnancy terminated? I mean, that's how pregnancies terminate multiple ways. The child is born, pregnancy is over. You have a miscarriage, pregnancy is over. There is an abortion, pregnancy is over. And in two of those cases, there's really, there's nothing to do. But in this one instance, one of the three cases, which I guess would be a relative rarity, the child is here. You're not going to care for it? You're going to see this child that cannot live without medical intervention and do nothing. However, if the child were born prematurely, you do realize that you wouldn't care what the mother had to say, the woman had to say, after the fact. Oh, it's a premature baby, I don't want it, kill it, kill it. You wouldn't hear any of that. You would simply take care of the child. Why? Because the child is here. And once the child is here, that life is precious apart from the thoughts, will, or person of the mother or the quasi-mother. Let me say this before I say anything else because I'll end the confusion. If you're a woman who would kill the child in your womb, you're not a mother. You can't be a mother. That's not what mothers do. Mothers protect children. You're not a mother. You're an egg donor. And you don't like the fact that your egg got fertilized, though you were putting it out there, and now you want to kill the natural result of your actions. You're not a mother. Stop calling them mother. I don't even really consider them women because a woman has a role with respect to childbearing, and it's not to kill the kid in the womb. You're just a female. It's your choice. However, it shouldn't be. No one should be able to choose to kill an innocent for their own convenience. But 44 out of 47 U.S. senators who happen to be Democrat all said if a child is born, but the mother didn't want it to be born alive, then even though the child is alive apart from the mother, thou shalt kill it. Are you cool with that? I can't be. I'm just saying, I can't be. And this is a big deal for the Democrat Party. That was the Senate. Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington went so far regarding abortion as to say not where Nancy was, it's fading as an issue. She had the exact opposite to say.
I think the party's response is going to be strong, and hopefully you've seen that it's strong across the board. Personally, I do think that there should be a set of core democratic ideals that we all agree to, and that you can't say you're a Democrat if you're against immigrants, if you're against abortion, if you're against gay marriage and LGBTQ rights. I'm not sure what it means to be a Democrat if all of those things are true.
If all of those things are true, you're a decent, family-oriented human being. That's what it means. Well, if you're against immigrants, nobody's against immigrants. People are against illegal immigration. Stop twisting it. If you are against illegal immigration, against killing a child in the womb, against perverting marriage for the benefit of a political ideology and not trying to mainstream or normalize the known mental disorder that is behind all of the LGBTQURST whatever. You're simply a normal human being who values family. Okay, if you're going to be a Democrat, you're not that. You're simply not that. And they're okay with that. You remember Tom Perez, the Democrat National Committee chairman? He's on the same page with Representative Jayapal, because there was a gentleman who was a Democrat who Bernie Sanders endorsed him for mayor. He's a pro-life Democrat. And Tom Perez took issue with that. I don't know if he took issue with that because Bernie Sanders is quote-unquote not officially a Democrat. But he was saying that you can't be a Democrat if you're not pro-abortion. This is where they are. They're willing to go, they're willing to die on that hill. Do you remember what was going on during the confirmation for Brett Kavanaugh? The drama, the angst, it was ridiculous. But that's where they are. So that you can also know where they are. The Blaze did an interesting bit of video editing where they caught Democrats in their own words, publicly. They didn't, these aren't private conversations, these are public comments that Democrats made. And then they followed it up with very interesting testimony that was offered before the U.S. Congress. When you get to that testimony, I will say it's going to be pretty intense. And if it's not something that you believe you want to hear, because it's going to describe an abortion, a second trimester abortion. But this is what the Blaze reported back in May.
When a woman gets pregnant, that is not a human being.
Some kids are unwanted. So you kill them now and kill them later. You bring them in the world unwanted, unloved. You send them to the naked shit. So you kill them now and kill them later.
So, through the third trimester. The third trimester goes all the way up to 40 weeks.
Okay, but to the end of the third trimester.
Yep, I don't think we have a limit in the bill.
So, where it's obvious that a woman is about to give birth, she has physical signs that she is about to give birth, would that still be a point at which she could request an abortion if she was so certified? She's dilating.
Mr. Chairman, that would be a decision that the doctor, the physician, and the woman.
I understand that. I'm asking if your bill allows that.
My bill would allow that, yes.
So in this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. So I think this was really blown out of proportion. But again, we want the government not to be involved in these types of decisions. We want the decision to be made by the mothers and their providers. And this is why, Julie, that legislators, most of whom are men, by the way, shouldn't be telling a woman what she should and shouldn't be doing with her body.
When a woman gets pregnant, that is not a human being inside of her. It's part of her body.
Second trimester D&E abortions perform between roughly 14 and 24 weeks of gestation. Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 22 weeks pregnant. Her baby is the length of your hand plus a couple of inches. And she's been feeling her baby kick for the last several weeks. But she's asleep on an operating room table. You walk into that operating room scrubbed and gowned, and after removing laminaria, you introduce a suction catheter into the uterus. This is a 14 French suction catheter. If she were 12 weeks pregnant or less, basically the width of your hand or smaller, you could basically do the entire procedure with this. But babies this big don't fit through catheters this size. After suctioning the amniotic fluid out from around the baby, you introduce an instrument called the Sofer clamp. It's about 13 inches long. It's made of stainless steel. The business end of this clamp is about 2.5 inches long and a half-inch wide. There are rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument, and when it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. A D&E procedure is a blind abortion, so picture yourself introducing this and grabbing anything you can blindly and pull, and I do mean hard, and out pops a leg about that big, which you put down on the table next to you. Reach in again, and pull out an arm about the same length, which you put down on the table next to you. And use this instrument again and again to tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart and lungs. Head in the baby that size is about the size of a large plum. Can't see it, but you have a pretty good idea you've got it if you've got your instrument around something and your fingers are spread about as far as they go. You know you did it right if you crush down on the instrument and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Then you can pull out the skull pieces. And you have a day like I had a lot of times. Sometimes a little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations. You just successfully performed a second trimester D&E abortion. You just affirmed her right to choose.
Yeah. You affirmed someone's right to choose. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to keep saying it until it finally registers with somebody. If a woman has the right to kill an innocent, then why are you upset when the police kill someone who is not innocent? Because you want to say there was no due process? What due process did the child receive? What advocacy did they get? You're hunting them down in the same way that you want to claim that the police are hunting down sometimes people of color. And don't get me started on people of color who abort children at a higher rate than anyone else in these United States. When you listen to that one of those earlier clips, you have a woman saying, "Who put you in God's place?" I have a better question. Who put you in God's place where you should be able to decide to kill what he conceived? Because it is God, for those who actually believe there is a God, it is God who grants conception. If it's terrible for someone to play God by telling somebody what they can do with their body, I'll get to that in a second. Please explain to me how it's good for some woman and some doctor to override God. That one doesn't fly with me. And as far as it be, well, the woman's got to do what she wants with her own body. Fine, do what you want with your own body. Just don't do anything against the child's body. That's all we're asking. Because the child's body is not your body. Just because it's in your body doesn't make it part of your body. It went in, and the design of things is for it to emerge and live on its own. Why interrupt that? And how is that an issue that should... To make that an issue is disgusting. To make that an issue in any way, shape, or form is disgusting. But that is what the Democrat Party is doing these days. I think it's reprehensible. They're consumed with it. And they are trying to tell you that if you do not agree with infanticide, then you're wrong. Well, I don't agree with infanticide. And I'm not wrong. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WGHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. And again, I want to remind you there will be some changes starting in July. We are going to change our affiliation. Talk America Radio will no longer be where you can find our program, find this program. We're still going to have the same content. The format will change slightly, but I don't think it's enough to warrant much discussion on that. And we're going to be heard an hour later. Of course, if you pick up the podcast, you can listen to that anytime. We'll make sure that we include all the information, because I do believe the podcast source may be revising. We want to make sure everybody knows where to get that. Again, final segment of the show, and this is going to be a topic that I don't think too many people would see coming from me, and that is medical marijuana. So, full disclosure, I worked at a cannabis company, a retail cannabis company, which sold not only medical marijuana but also recreational cannabis or marijuana. Also, full disclosure, I've never used marijuana internally. I've never ingested or smoked marijuana. I have used quote-unquote medical marijuana externally. And I've gotten decent results with it. That's just me, not everything works for everybody. So I'm not trying to convince anyone too much of anything, except I will say it is time to have the discussion. Why do I say that? When I was approached about the job at the cannabis company where I worked for a time, the first thing I had to do was deal with the fact that we were talking about a cannabis company. I'm not a drug user. I've never been a drug user. If they tell me it's illegal, I tend to leave it alone. So now that's kind of been my entire background, my entire life. So now you come upon a situation where in California, where I live, cannabis or marijuana is legal both recreationally and medically. And that causes issues because for the majority of people, the exposure to marijuana is people rolling a joint and getting high. And then there's also the trafficking therein. There are people who've made a lot of money trafficking in marijuana. And they weren't doing that as white-coated pharmacists. They were, pushers getting folks high. So I had to deal with that in my own mind. And the ways I started dealing with it was, you got to educate yourself. You go out and you read, and then you have to make a decision based on what it is that you find. Now, part of this for me is a bit of an interesting thing, because I have a few clips I want to deal with during this segment. And here's one from May of this year, 26th of May. Dr. Oz on his show brought in Sanjay Gupta of CNN, and they are apparently both on board with we need to find out about medical marijuana right now.
With the opioid crisis continuing to worsen, it's important to investigate anything that could help, including something that continues to cause controversy, medical marijuana. You all have strong feelings about medical marijuana? Right? A lot of folks seem to have an opinion on this. They're not all the same opinion. Dr. Sanjay Gupta is once again putting weed under the microscope with his groundbreaking reporting. And he's asking the question, could pot be the solution to America's opioid epidemic? Sanjay, you're a busy guy. You could do any project you wanted to on the planet. Yet this is your fourth special on medical marijuana. Why do you keep coming back to it?
Well, Oz, I think it's really important. I think this is one of these substances out there that for whatever reason has been demonized, and I think it can be a real medicine. I didn't believe in it earlier on in my career, and I've come to the conclusion that for certain conditions, not only can it work, it's the only thing that works. Mm-hmm. So it became almost as much a moral issue for me as a medical issue. We have to talk about this. We have to beat the drum because I don't think other people really are. I hope that someone like you, someone like me can actually keep educating people about this.
So what is the strongest evidence you found? Because whenever I have this argument, and I've had quite a few, people say, that's right. There's nothing much out there. What's the strongest evidence that could actually help with the opioid epidemic? That maybe it's not a gateway to opiates, it might be the gateway out of opiate addiction.
There's three important points, and let me make them quickly because they're important. Number one, we know, and there's plenty of evidence, that cannabis can treat pain. Okay, the National Academy of Science has a consensus on this. That's not in debate anymore. It can treat pain. It can even treat pain differently than opioids do. They both block pain signals to the brain. Cannabis also decreases inflammation, which is why it can work fast. Number two is it can stop the withdrawal that people have when they're trying to stop opioids. The thing is that people, they want to quit. is you start to quit and you get the terrible headaches, the worsening pain, the nausea and vomiting. You know what it's like? It's like patients who are undergoing chemotherapy, who are cancer patients, and cannabis for a long time has been used to treat that. It can be used to treat these withdrawals as well. But here's the most compelling thing for me, was that when you take opioids, within a few days, your brain changes. That's what they call a brain disease. Your brain has changed, and you are no longer able to really have the same judgment, the same decision-making, the same ability to quit. You can't just say no anymore. It's egregious to ask people to just say no if their brain has changed in this way. Cannabis, is specifically a component known as CBD, can help heal the brain. So treat the pain, treat the withdrawal, heal the brain. If you had to design something, Oz, to get us out of this opioid epidemic, it would probably look very much like cannabis. And it needs to be studied. It needs to be treated with the respect that it deserves.
And we're not talking about recreational marijuana, separate conversation, but this is medical use.
And therein really is the rub. When you say marijuana, most people do not yet associate two different compounds with the plant. There is THC. I can't remember personally what the THC stands for, but the words. And that is the component that causes the high. There's another component that is also prominent. It's called CBD or cannabidiol. Cannabidiol. Okay, we'll get to the pronunciation later. That does not cause a psychoactive reaction. You don't get high from that. And whatever medical benefits you can find in the marijuana plant are found in that compound, at least the ones that have been studied to the extent they've been studied. And you heard this discussion, there's looking for a way to get people off of opioids, and that's all well and good. Here is the issue. Marijuana has been around for a long time, as we all know. Somehow, at least in this country, whatever benefits that it had that were not making you forget everything that mattered to you because you were stoned, that kind of got off track. Got off track to the point where the government has stepped in, and there is such a stigma around the use of the plant, particularly smoking the plant, that it's really hard to see if there are any other benefits associated with it. And that's kind of tough. So I was looking at some things back in June of 2014. There's a doctor up in Canada named Gerling. And so this was obviously a little while ago because the information regarding marijuana is moving relatively rapidly. So 2014, not a lot of information, but he is talking about actual studies for cannabis. And the thing is, for me, if they're actually trying to look at it, okay, well, let them look. I'm not interested in the news anchor up in Alaska who decides to go on a profanity-laden tirade as she quits her job and says, "Bump it, I'm going to go and work for legalized marijuana in Alaska." I'm like, that, to be honest with you, that is likely to turn me off because you're just basically saying everybody's wrong when, I'm sorry, we have a lot of studies for Colorado and Washington, another two states that have made recreational use legal, and the results are negative. That's all there is to it. The issue there, of course, is that it's negative for something that's a psychoactive element. THC, I mean, getting high is not good. I mean, someone's going to try and tell you that getting high is a good thing. It's not. But again, the majority of people have not been given enough information for them to distinguish between the two major compounds in the marijuana plant. So here's what this doctor had to say. This is back in 2014 as he was working on saying, here's what we need to do if we're going to prescribe this. Because we've been prescribing marijuana to treat various ailments for quite some time.
So this video is a complement to a paper written by me in the Canadian Medical Association Journal on the prescribing of cannabis by physicians. And I think the points that I'd like to make are that it's understandable that physicians might be reluctant to prescribe cannabis because there is not a great deal of evidence about its effectiveness for many of the conditions we'd like to use it for, or about its safety. And those statements are true, and they're partly a function of its legal status. It just hasn't been studied as well as many of the other drugs that we might otherwise prescribe and which line our pharmacy shelves. But I think there's an important flip side to this story. I think the first point to make is that many of the traditional drugs that we might prescribe, and we prescribe every day, that come from pharmacies aren't as well supported by evidence as we might think. A good example of this is drugs for pain. Drugs like opioids, drugs like anti-inflammatories. We consider them evidence-based therapies, but they really haven't been studied and documented for many patients in a way that shows that their benefits offset their risks. That's my first point. The second point is that all drugs have toxicities, whether they are plant-based or they come from a pharmacy. And it's the case that the direct toxicities of drugs for pain, like OxyContin or fentanyl or anti-inflammatory drugs, are simply much greater than the toxicities of cannabis. I think the point that I think physicians and perhaps patients can take away is you can make a case to prescribe cannabis to selected patients, especially when the patient tells you it works for them, and when prescribing it allows the patient to reduce their use of other noxious drugs.
Reasonably cautious approach. And the takeaway for me there is there are a lot of things that we trust. Over-the-counter drugs, prescription drugs as well. There are a lot of things that we have been told we can trust, and they're not very well studied either. Now, does that make marijuana or is the CBD element more attractive? Not necessarily, but it does raise the specter of, are we discriminating against something because of another compound that we're not discussing? When you're talking about CBD for medical use, you're not talking about a joint per se. You're not talking about the same things that people use just to go out and get high. You're not. And one of the things that actually, in my research, that actually got me to take on the position within the cannabis company was actually stories like this, because there's more than a few of them out there. But this one from 2016 showed that there was a remarkable outcome for a child in Israel.
For 2.5-year-old Levy Parush, moments of joy are all too brief.
Good.
Diagnosed with severe epilepsy and cerebral palsy from birth, leaving him with brain damage, he suffered seizures, dozens a day. Now they're nearly all gone, with just a few drops a day of medical marijuana, cannabis oil, mixed into his food.
We saw a difference immediately, and then after a few weeks we didn't see any seizures at all.
Other medicines didn't work, his father says, or worse, caused severe side effects. Levy has now been on medical cannabis for a year and a half. This cannabis oil was developed in northern Israel. The oil is high in CBD, the pharmacological ingredient in cannabis, and low in THC, the psychoactive ingredient, the drug that makes you high. There's little research on the effects of medical cannabis on babies, but Parush has all the results he needs. Levy hasn't had a seizure in months.
It's just kind of when we feel that.
He takes the CBD oil daily and a second oil of THC only when Levy is having a bad day.
When you give Levy a drop of THC, that's the psychoactive ingredient in cannabis. It makes him high.
In the beginning, we were pretty anxious about it, I guess. But then we thought, well, what are we seeing? You know what I mean? We're seeing this kid that was before he was in distress, and now he isn't.
At home, Parush and his wife play with Levy and his little sister Geffen. The difference in development is stunning. She is 10 months old, a third Levy's age, and yet she can hold toys and play with her parents and so much more. This, Asaf Parush fears, will always be too much for Levy. Instead, he just hopes one day to hear his son say Dad. Oren Lieberman, CNN, Northern Israel.
So you give CBD to a child who's suffering from epileptic seizures, and the seizures stop. And we don't have anything else that seems to be able to do that. Does it work for everyone? I would probably say no. All drugs that we have don't work for everyone. That's kind of one of the reasons we have so many drugs, because one works and other doesn't. But when you can have that type of result, that's very interesting. Let me continue on that theme about the benefit that shouldn't be ignored no matter what you conclude on the overall topic.
In this study, we treated children with Dravet syndrome, which is a very serious genetic form of epilepsy that unfortunately has a very high seizure burden and a very high mortality from epilepsy, that these children who had not responded to often 5 or 10 other treatments were given cannabidiol or a placebo in addition to their existing medications. Cannabidiol is the major non-psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, also known as marijuana. So cannabidiol does not produce any high or psychoactive properties and therefore has less potential side effects, especially for use in children, than a psychoactive compound such as THC.
We were in the double-blind placebo-controlled phase of the study. And we did that for 14 weeks, and we were totally convinced that she was in a placebo because her seizures didn't change at all. And then we were able to roll into the open label extension. And the second day that we were in open label and we knew that she was getting the actual drug, she went seizure-free, completely seizure-free for 2 months, which has never happened.
The main findings of the study were that there was a very statistically significant reduction in the convulsive seizure frequency in patients who were randomized to cannabidiol when compared to patients who were randomized to placebo. So the message is that cannabidiol does work in reducing convulsive seizures in children with Dravet syndrome. My hope for the future is that this study will lead to more similar studies to assess cannabidiol and perhaps products containing both cannabidiol and THC in various forms of epilepsy.
And you have the normal caution with a tinge of excitement there that you see. And again, you see this particular compound coming through and doing things when other treatments that have been developed from other plants or from other sources did not work. To be able to take a very young person and give them a life where they actually have greater control of their body than being subject to seizures constantly, well, that's a big deal. Here is the problem with marijuana. The problem is not with the plant itself, it's with the people who use it. It's kind of like red pill, blue pill thing. You take the red pill and you get high as a kite and you feel great, I guess, kind of, but if you have anything that's really bothering you, it's not going to change. Or you can take the blue pill, which is not going to make you high, but it has a good chance if there is something that's medically amiss with you, this might be able to do something. They know it treats pain. There are other things that they are aware that it does. It's good for cancer patients who are dealing with the side effects of chemotherapy. Are known to use this. But think about this. If CBD can actually treat pain, then I would that nobody ever get high again. And just to be able to relieve people's pain without the side effects of things that we make up in pharmaceutical companies and in pharmacies, that's got to be something worth looking into. I'm not of the opinion that I need to change your mind about marijuana. Either you think it's a good thing, or you think it's a bad thing, or you're somewhere in the middle and you're still evaluating. In my opinion, and that's all it is, once you get away from the part of the plant that gets you high, and if you actually have a need, there's another thing, because people who get high, they just want to get high. There's nothing necessarily wrong with them. They just want to get high. But if you are looking to use the other part of the plant, the other substance in the plant, and there is something medically amiss with you, and this can help you, I'm just not the type of person who is going to conclude, as the Drug Enforcement Agency has, that it has no medical use. Let's not forget that we do use real opiates for medicine. Morphine is an opiate, for example. But if you take too much of it, if you misuse it, then it can get you a lot of problems. I think, personally, that it is time to look at this from the standpoint of, do we have a way to help people with this plant? If we do, then it's worthwhile trying to figure out what help we can deliver. If not, then nothing's really changed for us. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. I just really want two things. I want you and your family to do well. I want my country to do well. And things like this last topic, if they can be brought to bear to accomplish either one, then I, for one, am not going to be opposed to it. Until next week, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.